There are days in life that begin quietly, like any other day. Nothing feels different at first. The air is the same. The sky looks the same. People move around as they always do. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, something is already changing. It happened in a single day. Not slowly, not over weeks or months. Just one day. One moment after another, each carrying a small weight that slowly became heavier. At first, it was only a few words. Words spoken by them. Quiet at first, almost harmless. But words have a strange way of traveling. They move from one ear to another, from one heart to another, slowly changing shape as they go. And before long, those words begin to build something. A story about someone they thought they understood. They looked at him differently that day. Not openly, not loudly, but in small ways that were difficult to ignore. A glance that lingered too long. A silence that felt colder than usual. Sometimes people do not need to speak to show what they believe. It can be seen in the way they turn their faces away, in the way their voices lose warmth, in the way the space around them suddenly feels distant. Have you ever felt that kind of silence? Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that slowly grows between people. At first, he did not fully understand what was happening. The day continued, as always. Hours passed. The light in the sky moved slowly from morning to afternoon, but something had shifted. The air felt heavier, and though nothing had truly been taken from him, it felt as if everything had changed. They had already decided what they believed, without asking, without waiting. Sometimes the world does that. It moves faster than truth. It listens more closely to noise than to quiet understanding. And once a story begins to spread, it becomes difficult to stop. By the middle of that day, the feeling had become impossible to ignore. Eyes watched him in ways they had never done before. Some carried doubt, some carried quiet judgment, and some simply watched with a strange curiosity, as if waiting for something to happen next. But what could he do? What could anyone do in such a moment? Explain, defend, argue? The mind asks these questions quickly. Thoughts rise like sudden waves inside the heart. But the world outside was already moving, already deciding, already speaking. And so he stood there, feeling something quietly slipping away. Not something he could hold in his hands, not something he could chase after, but something softer, something invisible, trust, respect, perhaps even understanding. Strange how these things can disappear so quickly. One day they are there, steady and unquestioned, and the next day they are gone. Have you ever felt that before? That quiet moment when you realize the way people see you has suddenly changed. It does not arrive with loud noise. It arrives softly, like a door closing somewhere far away. At first, there is confusion, a silent question inside the heart. What happened? Why? But the answers rarely come quickly. Instead, there is only observation, watching, listening, feeling the distance grow. And yet, something unexpected also begins to appear in such moments. When everything around you becomes loud with judgment, a strange quiet begins to form inside. A space where no voices reach. A place where the heart begins to look inward instead of outward. That day, as the sun slowly moved toward the edge of the sky, he felt that quiet beginning to grow, not as strength yet, not as peace, just a small, fragile silence, the kind that appears when the world has already said everything it wishes to say, and there is nothing left to answer. And in that silence, he simply watched. He listened. He felt the weight of the day settle slowly around him. Because sometimes, before anything incredible can happen, everything must first fall completely silent. After that day, something quiet followed him. Not noise. Not confrontation. Just a quiet space that seemed to grow wherever he went. They watched him more carefully now. Their eyes carried questions they never asked. Their silence carried conclusions they had already made. It is a strange feeling when people begin to look at you as if they already know the whole story. And yet, they only know a small piece. Perhaps even a piece that was never true. Still, they waited. People often wait for a reaction. They wait for anger, for defense, for the moment when someone raises their voice and tries to explain everything. Because when that happens, their story feels confirmed. But he did not react, not in the way they expected. He listened when they spoke, even when their words felt sharp and heavy. He watched their faces when they looked at him with doubt. Inside, the heart was not as calm as it seemed. Thoughts moved quietly beneath the surface. Questions rose again and again. Should he speak? Should he explain what they had misunderstood? Would they even listen? These questions are not easy to silence. The mind returns to them like footsteps, walking the same path again and again. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, he replayed the moments in his mind, the words they said, the looks they gave, the distance that had suddenly appeared between hearts that once felt close. And deep inside, there was a small ache. Not anger, not even bitterness. Just the quiet pain of being seen incorrectly. Have you ever felt that before? When people believe something about you that you know is not true, and yet nothing you say seems able to change. It is a lonely feeling, because the instinct to defend yourself is very strong. The heart whispers, speak, explain, clear the misunderstanding. But something inside him hesitated, not because he had no words, but because he slowly began to see something else, something hidden beneath the surface of it all. He noticed how quickly people believe what they want to believe. How easily a quiet moment becomes a finished story in their minds, and how difficult it is to pull those stories apart once they have settled. Even if he explained everything, would it truly change what they had already decided, or would they simply search for new reasons to doubt him? These thoughts did not come all at once. They appeared slowly, like distant stars becoming visible in a dark sky. And as the days passed, something surprising happened. Their watching grew stronger. Their waiting became more patient. It was as if They were quietly saying, sooner or later, he will react. Sooner or later, he will prove what we believe. But time passed, and still he remained quiet, not silent in a cold way, not distant, simply calm. He continued moving through the days without defending himself, without arguing against the shadows that had formed around him. To them, this silence meant something. Some believed it confirmed their doubts. Some believed it showed weakness. And some simply could not understand it at all. But they kept watching, because silence makes people curious. When someone refuses to fight the battle they expect, the story becomes less clear. Confusion begins to grow where certainty once lived. And still, inside his own heart, the struggle was real. There were moments when the weight of it returned. Moments when the mind whispered again, say something. Tell them the truth. But each time that thought appeared, another question followed, quietly, behind. No. What if silence is not surrender? What if silence is simply patience? He did not yet know the answer, but he began to feel something changing inside him. Something small but steady. A feeling that perhaps not every misunderstanding must be chased away. Perhaps some truths reveal themselves only with time. And perhaps, sometimes, the quietest response carries more strength than any explanation ever could. There came a quiet moment when something inside him began to change. Not suddenly, not like a loud realization that shakes the mind. It was softer than that, almost unnoticeable at first, like the slow shift of wind that only the stillest trees seemed to feel. For many days, the questions had continued to visit him. They arrived when the world was quiet, when no voices were around, when the mind had nothing else to hold. Should he answer them? Should he defend what they believed was true? The heart does not easily accept misunderstanding. It wants balance. It wants fairness. It wants the world to see clearly. But slowly, very slowly, he began to notice something strange. The more he watched their reactions, the more he understood that their story was already complete. It did not need his words. It did not wait for his truth. It was already finished inside their minds. And this realization brought a kind of stillness. At first, it felt heavy, almost like surrender, as if by saying nothing, he was allowing the misunderstanding to grow stronger. But another thought followed quietly behind it. What if not every battle must be corrected? What if some battles are only noise? He began to look more closely at the feeling inside himself, not the feeling that wanted to argue, but the one that appeared when he chose not to. There was a small calm hidden there, fragile but real, and he started to wonder, why do people rush so quickly to defend themselves? Is it always about truth? Or sometimes, is it about pride? These questions did not accuse him. They simply sat beside him in the quiet. When someone challenges the way the world sees you, the heart often reacts. Like a flame meeting the wind, it grows louder. It tries to burn brighter. But flames also consume the air around them. Silence, on the other hand, behaves differently. Silence waits. Silence watches. Silence does not hurry to prove itself. And one evening, as the sky slowly dimmed into darkness, he felt the answer settle gently within him. He did not need to react. Not because he was weak, not because he had nothing to say, but because he finally understood something deeper. Not every voice deserves an answer. Some voices only wish to hear themselves. If he argued, they would continue speaking. If he defended himself, they would search for new reasons to doubt him. The cycle would continue without end. But silence does something unexpected. It interrupts the cycle. It leaves the noise without a place to land. This understanding did not remove the pain completely. There were still moments when the heart felt the sting of their judgment. Moments when the mind remembered the warmth that once existed between them. But the urge to explain, the urge to chase their approval, slowly began to fade. Instead, a different kind of strength appeared. The quiet strength of restraint. He realized that speaking is easy when emotions are loud, but remaining still when every part of you wants to respond requires something deeper. It requires patience. It requires trust in something that cannot be seen immediately. Trust that truth does not always need protection. Trust that time has a way of revealing what arguments cannot. And so, little by little, he chose silence. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of defeat. The silence of someone who understands that peace inside the heart is more valuable than winning a moment of noise. The world around him had not changed yet. They still watched. They still wondered. But inside, something had become steady. A quiet decision, a quiet understanding. Sometimes the greatest strength a person can show is simply choosing not to react. Time has a quiet way of moving forward. It does not rush. It does not argue. It simply continues, one day after another, carrying every moment gently into the past. And as time passed, the noise around him slowly began to change. Not suddenly, not all at once. But little by little, the voices that once seemed so certain began to grow softer. At first, it was barely noticeable. A glance that no longer carried the same sharp judgment. A silence that felt less heavy than before. People are curious by nature. They watch closely when they expect a reaction. They wait for the moment when someone proves the story they have already written in their minds. But when that moment never arrives, something unusual begins to happen. Doubt quietly returns. The certainty they once carried begins to loosen. They begin to wonder. Days turned into more days. And still, he did not chase their approval. He did not argue with their assumptions. He did not try to correct every whisper that moved through the air. He simply lived his quiet days as they came. Calm, steady, present. And in that quiet living, something deeper began to grow inside him. At first, he had chosen silence because he believed it was wiser than reacting. But now, it had become something else. It had become peace, not the fragile peace that depends on the opinions of others, not the peace that disappears when someone misunderstands you, a stronger peace. The kind that rests quietly inside, untouched by the shifting winds of the world. D. Have you ever felt that kind of calm? The calm that arrives when you stop trying to control how others see you. It is a strange freedom, because so much of life is spent chasing understanding from others, explaining ourselves, defending small pieces of who we are. But when that chase ends, the heart begins to breathe differently. The need to prove something fades. And in that space, clarity appears. He began to see the day he lost everything in a different way. At first, it had felt like something precious had been taken from him. Trust, respect, belonging. But now he wondered, had those things truly been his to begin with? If they could disappear so quickly, perhaps they were never as strong as they seemed. This thought did not make him bitter. It made him peaceful, because he realized that what truly mattered had never been in their hands. It had always been inside him. His patience, his restraint, his ability to remain calm when the world expected noise. These things had not been taken from him that day. If anything, they had grown stronger, and slowly, even they began to notice the quiet change. Some of them no longer looked at him with the same certainty. Some seemed thoughtful when their eyes crossed his path, and some, perhaps for the first time, seemed unsure of the story they had once believed so easily. But by then, something important had already shifted within him. Their understanding was no longer something he needed. The silence he had chosen had already given him something greater, a deeper respect for himself. The kind of respect that does not depend on applause or agreement. The kind that grows quietly through patience and self-control. And so the day that once seemed like the day he lost everything, slowly revealed a different truth. Perhaps it was not a loss at all. Perhaps it was a beginning, a quiet beginning. D. Because sometimes life removes the noise around us, not to punish us, but to show us the strength that exists when we no longer feel the need to react. Now expand next section only into a continuous script of 600, 700 words. Rules 5. No headings. Dubba, 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 dubba. No formatting, directly copy-paste. Ready. Narrations. Reflective tone pulig, simple English bullet, gentle. Emotional pacing. Deuce pauses, naturally. Pulig use prod-sans, softly. Avoid overmotivation or command-like. Focus on inner. Feelings, silence, and observation. Language must feel like a timeless moral story being told quietly at night. Do not reference modern life, technology, or specific professions. Do not mention any names unless already introduced. Write as if the listener is sitting alone, listening carefully. As more days quietly passed, something gentle continued to settle within him. The silence he had once carried like a burden no longer felt heavy. It had slowly become a place of rest, a place where his thoughts could move calmly without being pushed by the voices around him. In the beginning, he had wondered if silence would make the distance between him and the others grow wider. That fear had stayed with him for many days. But time has a quiet way of revealing things that words cannot. Without arguments, without long explanations, the story they once believed began to lose its certainty. People are quick to believe when noise surrounds them. But when the noise fades, they are left alone with their own thoughts. And thoughts, when given enough quiet, begin to question themselves. He noticed it in small moments. A passing glance that no longer carried suspicion. A greeting that returned softly after many days of distance. And sometimes simply the absence of the quiet tension that once followed him wherever he walked. Nothing dramatic had happened. There had been no confrontate. No moment where the truth was loudly revealed. Only silence and time. At first, he had believed he needed to restore what had been lost. The trust, the understanding, the place he once held among them. But as the days continued, he realized something surprising. The peace he had found inside himself had become more valuable than the things he thought he had lost. Have you ever noticed how easily people chase the approval of others? How much effort is spent trying to be seen in the right way, trying to be understood perfectly by every voice around us? And yet that kind of approval can disappear in a single moment. One misunderstanding. One careless story. One judgment spoken in the wrong place. The more he thought about it, the more he understood that his peace could not depend on something so fragile. What he had discovered during those silent days was stronger than approval. It was self-respect. The quiet knowledge that he had remained calm when anger would have been easy. The quiet certainty that he had protected his dignity without needing to fight for it. And that knowledge brought him a deeper kind of calm. Not the calm that comes from winning an argument, but the calm that comes from knowing you did not lose yourself. There is something powerful about that kind of stillness. It changes the way a person walks through the world. He no longer felt the need to explain himself in every moment. He no longer watched the faces of others, searching for signs of acceptance. He simply lived his days with the quiet steadiness he had learned. And strangely, that calm seemed to speak louder than any explanation could have. People noticed. Some did not understand it. Some quietly respected it. And some, perhaps without realizing it, began to question the story they had once believed so easily. But by that time, their understanding was no longer something he needed. He had already found something deeper. He had discovered that peace grows when a person stops fighting every misunderstanding. That dignity grows when restraint becomes stronger than reaction. And that silence, when chosen with patience, can protect the heart from many unnecessary battles. The world around him had not become perfect. People still carried their own thoughts, their own doubts, their own unfinished judgments. But those things no longer controlled the calm within him. And as the quiet evening settled gently over the land, he understood something simple that many people spend years searching for. Sometimes the strongest path is not the loudest one. Sometimes strength is simply the ability to remain steady, while the noise of the world slowly fades away. As the seasons slowly turned, the quiet he had chosen became something natural within him. In the beginning, Silence had required effort. There were moments when his thoughts pressed strongly against it, asking him to speak, to explain, to correct what had been misunderstood. But those moments had grown fewer. Now his days moved with a steadiness he had never known before. He walked the same paths. He greeted the same faces. The world around him continued with its ordinary rhythm. Yet inside, there was a deeper calm that had not existed before. It is a strange discovery, realizing that peace does not come from controlling how others see you. For many people spend their lives trying to shape the opinions of those around them. They measure their worth by approval, by agreement, by the comfort of being understood. But those things are fragile. They change easily. They rise and fall with the moods and assumptions of others. He had once believed that losing those things meant losing something important. Now he saw it differently. What had truly mattered was never out sea. To him, it was the quiet way he carried himself when the world became uncertain. The patience he held when judgment surrounded him. The restraint he chose when reaction would have been easier. These things had slowly shaped something stronger than approval. They had shaped character, and character grows quietly. It does not ask to be noticed. It does not demand recognition. It simply reveals itself through calm actions and steady presence. He noticed how different life felt when he no longer carried the weight of other people's expectations. The mind felt lighter. The heart felt more open. Even the simple moments of the day seemed clearer. The sound of the wind moving through the trees, the quiet steps along familiar paths, the stillness of the evening sky. Peace often hides in these small places, but it is difficult to notice them when the mind is busy defending itself. He had learned that lesson slowly, sometimes through discomfort, sometimes through discomfort, sometimes through long moments of quiet reflection. Yet those silent lessons had given him something lasting, a kind of inner balance that could not easily be disturbed. The voices around him still existed. People still formed their opinions, as people always will. But those opinions no longer held the same power over his thoughts. He had stepped outside that struggle. And in doing so, he had found something many people search for without realizing it. Freedom. Not the freedom to change the world or to control what others believe. A quieter freedom. The freedom to remain true to yourself even when you are misunderstood. The freedom to walk your path without needing constant agreement from those around you. And with that freedom came a quiet sense of gratitude, not for the misunderstanding itself, but for what it had revealed. Without that difficult moment, he might never have discovered the strength that silence can hold. He might never have seen how dignity grows when a person refuses to react to every passing judgment. Sometimes the hardest days carry hidden lessons, lessons that only appear after time has softened the pain. And now, when he looked back at those earlier days, they no longer felt like loss. They felt like a quiet beginning, because in losing the need to prove himself to others, he had gained something far more valuable. He had gained peace within his own heart. And that peace did not depend on applause, approval, or agreement. It simply existed, steady and calm, like the quiet sky above a sleeping world. In the end, that quiet strength remained with him wherever he walked. And perhaps that was the most powerful thing of all, because the world may continue speaking, judging, and questioning. But a person who has learned the strength of silence no longer needs to answer every voice. Sometimes it is enough simply to remain calm and keep walking forward. There comes a quiet moment in every long journey when a person begins to understand what truly remained after everything else changed. For him, that moment did not arrive suddenly. It appeared slowly, like the gentle light of early morning spreading across a quiet landscape. The days had continued to pass as they always do. The same sky above, the same roads beneath his steps, the same rhythm of life moving forward without hurry. But inside him, something had settled. The silence he once carried with uncertainty had now become a companion. It no longer felt like something he was holding back. Instead, it felt like a quiet strength that walked beside him. He no longer wondered how others judged him. Their thoughts moved like distant winds now, passing by without disturbing the calm within his heart. This kind of peace is not loud. It does not arrive with celebration or sudden joy. It arrives quietly when a person finally stops struggling against every misunderstanding. When the heart accepts that not every story must be corrected, and not every voice must be answered. He often reflected on those earlier days, when everything had first begun to change. At the time, it had felt like something important had been taken from him: trust, respect, belonging. But now, when he looked back with a calmer mind, he began to see those moments differently. What he thought he had lost was never completely his to hold. The opinions of others are like shifting shadows. They move and change with the light of every new story. But the things he had gained, those were different. Patience, restraint, self-respect. These things had grown quietly inside him, while the world waited for him to react. And because they had grown in silence, they had grown strong. Have you ever noticed how the strongest roots grow beneath the surface, where no one can see them? From above, the ground appears still and ordinary, but beneath it, something steady is taking hold. His strength had grown in the same quiet way. The world may never fully understand what had happened during those silent days. Many people only notice the loud moments in life, the arguments, the victories, the visible changes. But the deepest transformations often happen where no one is watching. They happen inside the quiet spaces of the heart. And that is where his greatest change had taken place. He had learned to stand without needing approval, to remain calm without needing to explain himself, to walk forward without carrying the weight of every opinion around him. This did not make him distant from others. If anything, it made him gentler. Because once a person understands how easily people misunderstand one another, they begin to see others with more patience. He no longer expected affection from the world. He simply moved through it with steady calm. The voices around him continued, as voices always will. People still form their thoughts, their judgments, their changing beliefs. But those things no longer shaped the peace inside him. And in that quiet freedom, he discovered something many people spend their lives searching for: contentment. Not the kind that comes from praise, not the kind that depends on being proven right, but the kind that appears when a person no longer feels the need to fight every battle that appears before them. Sometimes the greatest victory in life is invisible. It is the moment when the heart becomes still, when the need to defend fades, when silence itself becomes enough. And as the quiet evening settled gently across the land, he continued walking his path with the same calm presence. Nothing about him seemed extraordinary from the outside, but within him a quiet strength remained, a strength built not through noise, but through patience, not through reaction, but through restraint. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all. The world may never fully understand the power of silence, but those who discover it carry a peace that no voice can ever take away. And in the stillness that followed, he understood something simple, yet powerful. What was taken from him that day belonged to the world, but the peace he found in silence belonged only to him. And that was something no one could ever take away.